This is the true story of 5 children who vanished in a house fire without leaving a single bone behind. It was Christmas Eve, 1945, in the small town of Fayetteville, West Virginia. Inside their cozy home, George and Jenny Sodder were celebrating with 9 of their 10 children. The older kids were already asleep, but 5 of the younger ones, Morris, Martha, Louie, Jenny, and Betty, were so excited for Christmas morning that they begged to stay up a little later to play with their new toys. Their mother, Jenny, agreed. Before she went to bed, she reminded them to turn off the lights and lock the doors. It was the last time she would ever speak to them. Around 1 in the morning, Jenny was woken up by the phone ringing. She answered, but the voice on the other end was unfamiliar. It was a woman asking for someone she didn't know. And amidst the background noise of clinking glasses and laughter, the woman let out a strange, mocking laugh before hanging up. Jenny dismissed it as a wrong number and went back to bed. But just a half hour later, she woke again, this time to the smell of smoke. Her husband's office was on fire. The house was quickly becoming an inferno. George and Jenny, along with 4 of their children, managed to scramble out into the freezing night. But the 5 children who had stayed up late were trapped in their attic bedrooms. Panic set in. George raced to call the fire department, but the phone line was dead. He then ran to his 2 work trucks, hoping to pull them up to the house and use them to climb to the attic window, but neither truck would start. They had worked perfectly the day before. Desperate, they looked for the heavy ladder that was always kept leaning against the side of the house. It was gone. In a last-ditch effort, George tried to climb the house itself, slicing his arm open in the process, but it was no use. The family could only watch in horror as their home, the fire department, plagued by its own mysterious delays, didn't arrive until 8 in the morning, long after the house was nothing but a smoking basement full of debris. The assumption was tragic but simple. The 5 children had perished in the blaze. But when the fire chief began to sift through the ashes, he found nothing. No bones, no skulls, no teeth, not a single trace of the 5 children. A local crematorium employee told Sodders that bones remain even after a body is burned at 2,000 degrees for 2 hours. Their house fire had lasted less than 45 minutes. How could 5 bodies completely vanish? Despite the impossible lack of evidence, the official death certificates were issued. The cause of death for all 5 children was listed as fire or suffocation. But George and Jenny refused to believe it. Their children weren't in the ashes. They had to be somewhere else. Their grief turned into a relentless, lifelong investigation. George hired a private investigator, and they began to uncover a series of disturbing clues. They found their missing ladder, thrown into a ditch 75 feet from the house. A telephone repairman confirmed that the phone line hadn't been burned through. It had been deliberately cut. Then came the eyewitnesses. A bus driver who passed through Fayetteville in the early hours of Christmas morning claimed he saw a car speed by, with the occupants throwing balls of fire at the Sodder house. Marion, one of the Sodder children who escaped, remembered seeing a strange man watching them from the highway as the house burned. Sightings of the missing children began to surface. A woman who worked at a hotel between Fayetteville and Charleston swore she saw the children the week after the fire. They were with 2 men and 2 women of Italian descent and seemed to be held against their will. Another woman in St. Louis claimed Martha Sodder was in a convent there. The most compelling clue pointed towards a possible motive. George Sodder, an Italian immigrant, was a vocal critic of Benito Mussolini, the fascist dictator of Italy. His strong opinions had made him enemies within the local Italian community. He recalled a chilling threat from a man who had tried to sell him insurance. When George refused, the man grew angry and warned him, "Your goddamn house is going up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed. You are going to be paid for the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini. Another visitor had once come to the house looking for work, and after being turned away, pointed to the fuse boxes and warned that they would cause a fire someday. For years, the Sodders pursued every lead, spent their life savings, and never gave up hope. In 1952, they erected a large billboard on Route 16, featuring the faces of their 5 missing children and offering a reward for information. It would remain there for nearly 40 years, a heartbreaking monument to a family's unanswered questions. Then, in 1967, more than 20 years after the fire, a letter arrived for Jenny. It was postmarked in Kentucky, with no return address. Inside was a photograph of a young man in his mid-20s. He had dark, curly hair and dark eyes. On the back of the photo was a cryptic handwritten message. Louis Sodder, I love Brother Frankie. Elo boys. A 90132. The Sodders hired another private investigator to look into the new lead, but he took their money and disappeared. The FBI briefly investigated at the family's request, but concluded the case was a local matter and closed their file. No arrests were ever made. No concrete answers were ever found. The mysterious photograph was the last significant clue the family would ever receive. Jenny Sodder wore black for the rest of her life, a symbol of her unending mourning. She passed away in 1989, still believing her children were alive somewhere. George never rebuilt the house. He maintained the site as a memorial garden for his lost children until his death. The remaining Sodder children and their descendants have continued the search, but the mystery endures. Was it a tragic accident, full of impossible coincidences? Or was it a meticulously planned kidnapping, disguised by arson? A dark act of revenge against a man for his political beliefs? We may never know for sure. The Sodder children's case remains one of America's most haunting unsolved mysteries, a story of a family destroyed not by flames, but by the terrifying silence that followed. If the fire didn't take the Sodder children, then someone else did, and they were never brought home.